but in a different way.
Okay, it's recording.
All right.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Barry and Nan, thank you for joining me for further conversation. Basically, I decided to organize this symposium because I thought we need to think a little bit more deeply about the nature of experience on mechanistic and evolutionary levels, and you two came to mind, so let's go.
Thanks
want to
for
talk about?
having us, Adam. Thank you
Adam.
so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you for the invitation. It's really interesting topics.
So we have pain, pleasure. We have the nature of affects and their evolutionary origins, and like just questions that we I guess beg. Like we talk about pain, we talk about pleasure as if we know what we're talking about. We talk about emotions as if like it's like, well, which emotions and why? So do you want to start with like pleasure and pain, core affects? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in, Adam, and I'll say that I think what's really important, you just picked up on a very important idea to begin to think about how we think about these things and actually try in some ways to define what we mean. So, for example, when we're talking about emotions, the point of my really being very motivated to disseminate Jaak Panksepp's work is that he's delineated a visceral nature of emotion that he has been able to articulate, to map the circuits in the key neuromodulators for the visceral experience of emotion. But when we talk about in psychology emotion, you have people talking about it as if everybody agrees on what emotions are and have hot debates about whether animals have emotions versus people. And the continuity of emotions and the continuity that we share with animals is something that I think is very much neglected. Even though Darwin was big on this back when, modern psychology has become so incredibly cognitive. And I think what I learned from Barry very early in my graduate school, second time around when he had me come to the program, was really about how subcortical stuff in terms of the brain and psychology is so ignored. And that I think is a big mistake, because I think we need to look at the levels of everything. So Barry talks about neurons, and Adam, you talk about putting it together with this entrainment individually and collectively. And I guess I'm talking about what Panksepp saw as basically the hardware that we came with in terms of these primal core affects, pain and pleasure, which, do that, motivate us to approach an avoidance. So in my understanding that I just want to share as a person who had panic attacks very badly in my early 20s, and the psychology approach is all about you're angry with your mother and you got to just learn how to be able to express your anger, when it really was something much more visceral and embodied that I think I was predisposed to just by my genes. Anxiety goes into the gene pool because to some extent it's advantageous. So I think we really need to think about, what do we mean by consciousness? To look at it in an evolutionary way. What do we mean by emotions? Whether it's the visceral. Jump in, Barry.
Okay, let me. I find that it helps me to clarify feelings and emotions, and because there's an afferent and there's an efferent. The actual word emotion means to move out. So the emotion is and we say emotional expression. I think that's accurate to say emotional expression, because that's something that is an efferent phenomenon. It's an expression. It's a behavior that you can observe, as opposed to what you mentioned, the word affect, the feeling. So there's a sensory component, the feeling of visceral sensation. There's visceral sensation, which is the feeling. And then there's, in response to the feeling, there's an expression. There's an output. There's the expression. So the feeling is the afferent, and the expression is the emotion.
God, I'm so glad you just said that. I was actually just writing something and feeling kind of nervous about it, where I was trying to say that like I was relating to this debate of like when we should use the words feelings and emotions for what. And I was suggesting that like, what if we thought of emotion as being more like the action side and
That's right.
feeling as the perception side of an
Emotional
action perception
expression.
cycle?
That's observable. So
That's
so
true. But I'd like to jump in there and
anger, the
to
feeling of anger.
distinguish.
What? Yeah.
Can I jump in to distinguish between emotions that are more cognitively infused versus the core affects that we're talking about with affective consciousness, are integral processes that are linked to the emotional expression, or the, what you're talking about, the going into action. They can't really be separated because it's a visceral embodied experience.
Well, all those terms that you're using, visceral embodied experience, that's a feeling. It's an affect. It's a feeling of activity in the viscera.
Right. And that's
what
it's an
awareness. It's an awareness.
Before.
It's a cognitive, conscious. I mean,
well, no. You don't need even to have your neocortex to have those
that's
affects.
right. It's
not cognitively infused in the way that we think about it.
Right, but
it's an awareness.
It's an awareness at some level. It's a visceral awareness at some level.
I got a proposal.
That's the feeling.
I don't know if this works, but so the idea would be that there is a kind of like separability to some extent of like a cybernetic process of the action, the perception, but then they're getting kind of, they're necessarily entangled and bound together as you achieve this functional closure.
Sure.
But so I'm wondering, so then could we then distinguish maybe even 3 levels? So we might emphasize, even though they ultimately have to be like co-entangled, the action, the perception is part of one cycle and maybe as like a unit of sense making for an organism. There is some separability also in terms of process, depending on like how fine grained we're looking. But I'm wondering if also like we could think of maybe a 3-tier hierarchy where it's like unconscious emotions and feelings, which could be in some ways an oxymoron, but maybe not, in that like this, the information going out, the information going in, them bound together into a coherent experience, conscious, and then meta-aware on top of that. That's like, and then people, I don't want to use like that terminological toothbrush, but
let me say, I have this idea that talking about evolutionary, evolutionary link, that we have, there is the animal in us that, I remember my wife used to say, you can learn a lot from our cat, Minty, because Minty always takes the easiest path. She always computes the path of least resistance. So, I mean, if let's say in our bodies, we evolutionarily, we have biologically adaptive reactions. We are either not, there are like reflexes. We have, there's reflexes and normal inhibition of antagonistic muscles. We're hardwired to have certain reactions to stimuli. Now, that is maintained by our physical plant, our autonomic system. Our autonomic system controls our bodily reactions. That's what you're talking about, embodiment. We have reactions to situations that we are not necessarily consciously aware of, but our bodies are reacting to social or other kinds of environmental stimuli. We have a bodily reaction to it that is supported by our autonomic system. And that is, it can be variably conscious or unconscious. We run up the stairs, our autonomic system regulates the blood flow and our heart rate, and so gives us the support of our activity. And that is to some extent, that's our normal evolutionarily developed response to situations. And that, let's say that's always active at some level. And then the social environment or our learning, our cultural background, that all impacts on it, on this basic level. We can bring it under control or not to various extents. And so that's like, I remember the example of waiting to hear about my grant application. I'm very nervous and my heart is beating. And I had this image on the phone of me running away as fast and as far away as I could get from there. And it was a very primitive kind of crazy thing that here I am, I'm running away as far and as fast as I could. My autonomic system is doing that for me. And that's an extreme example. But let's say it's always doing that to some extent. It's always doing some wish fulfillment, or you call it a wish fulfillment or a biological imperative. It's always doing that at some level, whenever, as long as we're living. It's always active. And then everything else is superimposed on that. So that can be unconscious, but it's adaptive. And then or it could be maladaptive in the situation, but our body is doing the best it can, in terms of our biological imperative. That is always going on. And then that's a feel that can give us a feeling, and that can make us, if it can give us the feeling of anger or happiness or desire. Those are feelings, and then we express those in various ways that can be culturally influenced.
I'd
I
like
have
to,
two questions. Okay, you can go first, but I have two questions for you.
I wanted to connect the dots between what Barry was saying and something that you were talking about, entrainment, Adam. So Barry's talking about the autonomic nervous system, which I think is such an important thing in terms of people's regulation of their everyday lives, their bodies, and all of that. And you were mentioning this whole entrainment thing. And it made me think, Adam, of how our autonomic nervous systems are very much open at birth. So the baby is being regulated in a lot of ways by the caretaker. And with my couples, oh my goodness, most of the work I do therapeutically is with couples, and they're always impacting each other's nervous systems constantly. So this whole idea,
Part of each other's homeostasis.
exactly. And a lot of times what happens with couples is they're not learning, or they haven't learned how to be able to co-regulate, because they haven't had a very good experience in early childhood where they learn how to be able to regulate in conjunction with the people around them. They have to kind of learn how to self-soothe. And this is where you see people head off to, like, a lot of times addiction, or, in sex with other people, pornography and addiction. And coming back to this idea of entrainment, we know this happens in the room when we hold our pets. We go into this entrainment. How can we make better use of this clinically, even?
I mean, the entrainment, or I'm thinking in some ways more mechanistically, but like psychologically, you could think of it in ways as like attunement. And then from your perspective, it's like attunement is a kind of extended co-homeostasis. And coming back to what Barry was just saying, and ultimately actually being cashed out in the organism, in its autonomic states, in its regulation of life management. It's like, how do you make better use of it? You would be able to say better than I would that, but I mean, for me, just what the
How to make
mechanism
use of it,
suggests
is that if we I think that the more congruent we are, the more congruent our actions or interactions are with with our autonomic, with this biologically imperative, autonomically supported activity, the closer we are to being congruent in our actions with that, the healthier we are. And to the extent that we're incongruent between that, I think that's where the psychosomatic disease can develop. But
so actually attention, like actually tuning in, what is going on with me, as part of creating this ability to have alignment, alignment within and between.
Attunement with our whole, all our systems, to the extent that all our systems are congruent with our biologically imperative, maybe wishful, you can call it wish fulfillment, or adaptive, the biologically adaptive activity, to the extent that we're doing, we're acting congruent with that, and congruent with other people, the interaction, that's healthy. And to the extent that we're incongruent with that, you know, if we feel, we feel like we should be like doing something, but we can't because it's socially inappropriate, that's incongruent, and that can produce problems. So the attunement and the entrainment, it's all kind of getting this kind of synchrony and congruency. That's good.
So
And it can be on the individual basis or the interactional basis.
So maybe one thing that could be useful is like I've been thinking on the mechanistic level of like what allows for different kinds of entrainment and coupling. And there's this notion of like self-organized criticality, or of a system that's like poised between not too much order or disorder, where you can dynamics can adapt, they can flow, but they can maintain structure. And so I'm wondering if some of the practices that we tend to do are actually to potentially help us to have like this kind of congruency where things are highly aligned. You're bringing internal entrainment through moving together, through, you know, even like the basic games of like patty cake growing up. But there's a play about it that gives it's flexible too. So it's like a slightly negotiable, like you're tuned in, there's a harmony there, but other people can jam with you, like you can. And so it seems like that this notion of like being poised at the right amount of order and disorder, not too much of each, that might be like really important.
Like syncopated music, you know, it's in the context of music and rhythm and harmony, but there are wrinkles on it. But fundamentally, there's a symphony there. There's a kind of this concert, things going in concert, and you can have variations on the theme. I think is that what you're getting at? But it's basically
it would allow for this kind of adaptive capacity to be poised in that way. Like you can move between ways of being if you're like not like locked into just one rhythm, but it's more of a
flexibility.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's a neurological example of exactly what you're saying, is this idea of hypersynchrony. If you have hypersynchrony of neural activity in the brain, those are seizures. I mean, it's good to have synchrony, because then you have your systems are all going together. You know, your breathing and your heart rate, your breathing, your locomotion are synchronized, and it's the easiest movement, the easiest motion, the strongest motion. But if it's hypersynchrony, then that's abnormal. That's a seizure. And I mean, that's the idea of entrainment. You can entrainment to a certain optimal level is good, because it's focused and it's all systems are go and working in the same direction.
Better be self-limiting though.
If it's too synchronized, then it's abnormal. It's pathological, because there's no variability. And the
makes
whole
me think of your pleasure pain model.
Pleasure pain. Also, it's
in principle.
Donald Lindsley's idea of the talking about what happens with arousal as opposed to sleep or seizure is the amount, it's the phase differences among different parts of the brain, that if they're all synchronized, that's a seizure, that's abnormal. In a lower level of that kind of synchrony is what happens in delta sleep, that they're big slow waves. But that means that there are big populations of neurons that are synchronized together, but they're not totally synchronized. And then with arousal, what the reason that the EEG amplitude gets low and high frequency is that it's the net effect of many different areas of the brain, of the cortex, being in their phase, in different phases. They're all active, but in different phases. And when you look at the net effect of that, there's no one area that has high amplitude, but it's a lot of different frequencies.
Just trading off of coherence, like in the dynamics.
Right, and that's arousal. That's arousal, because then the different systems are all in different phases and responsive to what's ever going on. That's very efficient.
And information, you could have differences that make a difference within that kind of system. Like you can have like things can register on multiple scales. Like it would have like richer combinations could come from not just like, because like if everyone's like agreeing on like one rhythm, that's like, I guess like one bit. It's like
that's like one seizure. It's a giant seizure. There's no variability. There's no flexibility. The whole idea of very flexible responsiveness, of having different phases of brain regions and different phases of responsiveness, means that there's much greater flexibility, much greater flexibility of response. That's what happens in arousal. So I mean,
I've been trying to like, I'm wondering how far I can generalize your pleasure pain model in terms of like, because I'm seeing an analogy between like we were just talking about and this like necessary opponency you're describing of like you're working with like you're grounded in like the nervous system, but I'm wondering if this is like a general cybernetic principle, like a general, like you might see this across scales, the same dynamics playing out of you want this convergent coherence, and you know, all else being equal, there's like more is good convergence, but you want it to potentially not be rigid, and also you don't want the convergence to be self-undermining to bring you into a completely chaotic or damaging regime. So it's like this balance of anyway.
An optimal there's an optimal level. I mean, talking about entrainment, the entrainment, you know, that interesting study by Paul Byers of the three Eskimos standing around the fishing hole, and they're all moving, they're making slight different movements, but what he showed was that they're all moving, any time they make a little movement, they're all doing it at the same phase of the alpha, and so there are many, there can be many seconds in between any movement, but anytime they make a movement, they're all in synchrony with each other. It's a group of three. It's a social group of three, and they're in some kind of synchrony, and but a lot of flexibility among it. So they're interacting, but they're also independent.
I'd like to get a word in here in terms of clinical, okay? The reason why I wrote my book is about this anhedonia that seems to be like blowing up all over. Even before COVID, people were reporting more anxiety, more depression. Anhedonia is a symptom of the disorders and also a cause and contributor of these. And getting to this idea of entrainment and connection and coherence and congruency, I'm greatly concerned about how disconnected people are from each other and from their bodies, which is why I think it's really important that psychology starts to talk more and more about how we integrate this understanding of the visceral core affects and how we can be, hijacked by that, because I see this all the time.
And the extreme example of that is people with alexithymia who have psychosomatic illnesses. The alexithymia means no words for feelings. They're unaware of their feelings. And those are people who are highly susceptible to psychosomatic disease because they're not responding to their internal signals.
Now think of those Eskimos. If they were on their smartphones, I'm sure they wouldn't be having.
That's right. Because they're observing each other.
So I'm wondering, in terms of like, it's like this balance or like cybernetic Tao, you want to be able to, like, each of these core affects, they're adaptive, they have a function, and you want them to be accessible to you. And so you want to be able to like enter into them, and so you want the coherence, you want to be able to tune in and get this entrainment within yourself to move in that way, and maybe together as a group to co-emote and have this emotional contagion. But you also like don't want to get stuck in it either. So you don't want to be in this like alexithymic like blab place where you can't enter, like you don't want to be in this place where you're without any emotion or blood, but you don't want to get locked in either. So I'm wondering, it's this like this optimal entrainment.
If you can get to the point of being able to entrain, then you can be liberated to be independent of that. So you can come and go. It's a flexibility. If you're frozen in one mode, that's pathological. So,
And
you don't want to be like rage all the time.
I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to talk about the defensive versus more of the affiliative kinds of core affects. And I think when people are not in connection with their own nervous systems and core emotions, and they're not connected with other people, they're much more likely to be in the defensive states that really get in the way of the connection and of the proper functioning of these core systems. And this is what I see hijacked. I look at this a lot as a clinician every day, trying to figure out how to help people promote their abilities to be caring of each other, of having playfulness, to have access to the lust system, and the down-regulating of the defenses, which really is like an over-activation of the sympathetic system. So it's really about, how I imagine that when we feel safe, and Adam, you said something in your presentation about the dual nature of attention, that it's easier to get attention to something when you're in that entrainment, and then that actually promotes the attention, promotes the entrainment. So it's like that ability, it's all about, and the attention stuff is so hijacked by our visceral emotions, because when you're in pain or when you're anxious or when you have a lot of fear or whatever, that's where your attention goes, to what feels bad. Pain really
that's where
and a lot of people live in their pain bodies. The concept of the pain body.
So that's a frozen metaphor. And that's not healthy. But I just want to get back to the idea of the entrainment. There are certain functions of the entrainment, like in the case of orgasm, genital stimulation, you start the repetitive stimulation produces recruitment of neurons that gets synchronized, and the synchrony, the entrainment and the synchrony results in being in ejaculation. In the case of sexual stimulation, it results in ejaculation, which requires the activation of the sympathetic system to produce the ejaculation. And that's a high threshold system. It's not active all the time. We don't walk around ejaculating. So in that context,
for yourself, I'm teasing you.
in that context, the rhythmical entrainment, the rhythmical stimulation of sexual stimulation, the rhythmical genital stimulation produces an entrainment, recruitment of many different systems, which building of the excitement enables the activation of this normally high threshold system, the ejaculation system. And then, so in that context, that amount of entrainment and synchrony and recruitment is has a function. It has the function of producing ejaculation. If it goes too far, an extreme situation of that is a seizure, where everything gets synchronized. That's abnormal. So there's a certain level, optimal level, biologically optimal level of different functions where a certain degree of entrainment is optimal, but then it could become pathological.
So to what degree are all, both like the mechanism itself of like this, like pleasure and pain as part of like the signal for tuning yourself to optimal entrainment?
Pleasure is do again what you just did.
Do more, get more of it, and then pain, stop, like you know, let the attractor dissolve. I'm wondering whether like all the
stop.
Whether all like the core affects potentially like have this set up, even like the ones that seem like they would like be like sticky attractors, like panic. But there's a sense like if you go into it and if you don't panic about panic, there would be this kind of self-regulating quality to it that would just like, by letting it be there, tuning in, just all the evolved affects would just have to be set up with this kind of like opponency balancing, like and like so you're like, but you don't think this. You think like, no, the panic's here, it's the worst thing possible. Then you have like meta panic. But actually, if you just go into it, the pain body kind of,
by going into it, it will elicit its own inhibition. And
maybe I hope so.
Well,
another way,
we're evolutionarily, we're adapted to do that because we have survived evolutionarily. So we have those systems that are hardwired, the self-regulating systems, and it's just a question of responding to them. So I mean, what your idea of tuning in, yeah, if you tune into it, then there will the panic won't get out of control. If you're tuned into the panic response, then it will enable its own control mechanisms. Because if we didn't have those internal, if we didn't evolutionarily develop those internal mechanisms of the self-preserving mechanisms, we wouldn't be here. So
trust what you're saying intellectually. It doesn't feel that way though.
I know, because we ignore, to the extent that we ignore them or don't respond to them or not responsive to them because of social pressure, cultural pressures, that we screw ourselves. But if we just depend on our, our evolutionary imperative, our biological, we have evolved. We have evolved and survived. We have survival mechanisms that we embody. We are built that way. It's taken a long time, but here we are. So we have all those self-protective mechanisms. We can ignore them, and that's when we run into trouble. But if and I think some of the drug therapy, the psychoactive drug therapy, facilitates our ability to respond to the visceral sensations, the visceral signals.
Hallucinogenics that you're talking about, because
What?
You said psychoactive. You mean the hallucinogens that?
Yeah. Using those in therapy, it makes the individual aware of the visceral sensations.
5-HT2A is heavily expressed on the anterior insula, so that could potentially contribute.
That's right.
I want to talk about panic because that's a great example. The panic activation, people who are predisposed to maybe panic attacks. It actually is like the learning levels where you panic about the panic because you've had experiences that were aversive as a result of your panic experiences that predispose you to panic about the panic and get inflamed, more inflamed as a result of that. So you're absolutely right. The treatment of a lot of these things is to learn to be present to the sensations in the body. The thoughts in the mind, you can learn to loosen and soften, and your interpretations of what the panic means, you know. So I, with my panic disorder, learned to be able to have the sensations in my body and not to panic about the panic.
So in other words, in my case of where I was waiting to hear about the outcome of my grant application, and I was running in my mind, it was like a dream image, running away as far as I could get, as fast as I could get there. If I recognized that my autonomic system is doing the running away because of this situation, then I wouldn't panic. I mean, I'd understand why is my heart beating? Why do I have this tachycardia all of a sudden? It's because I'm running away because I don't want to face the outcome, the results. I don't want to hear, that I didn't get it. So
I'm going to use that. That's like a really good framing, because it's like, it both gives you like some distance and like a little bit of self-compassion too, because it's like, this is, thank you, panic system, for giving me some of this experience. And like, no, this isn't like you're bad because you're experiencing. No, that's part of it. There's a challenge. That's what happens.
The child in me is doing something very logical, which is getting the hell out of here. Here's danger. Here's potential danger. I mean, I'm framing it as it's a cognitive concept that, of rejection, of failure. That's very highly cognitive. But my child in me is getting the hell out of here because it's a danger situation. And my autonomic system is doing that. If I just realize that, then that's the explanation of why is my heart racing. It's because I'm running away.
I like this a lot better than harshly judging myself for my suffering, which works great.
No, exactly.
It works every time.
Overrated, Adam. I mean, I've made a career out of teaching people what I've needed to know. And, I went on the Today Show and was able to have a good time and be relaxed because I've learned how to work with my autonomic nervous system and how to get into that place, a lot of just training my body to like get into that place of being in that more relaxed tone.
So I think those drugs, the hallucinogenic drugs and the psychoactive drugs facilitate that ability to know your visceral sensations.
What do they mean? 20 years maybe if I did that instead of 20 years of yoga and psychotherapy.
Right. Here are my gut sensations. What are they telling me? They're telling me I want to hit somebody because I'm angry, or they're telling me that I'm, that I want to run away. That's what my body is. That's what my autonomic system is doing. It's maintaining my physical plant, doing what is best for me at that moment. And if I just understand what is it telling me, that in itself tells me why am I feeling this way.
So that's the information. I always say that activation of our core affects gives us information, but there's also can be inflammation, as I like to say, because when we've had a lot of experiences, a lot of learning, a lot of conditioned boo-boos around something, for example, then when that affect is triggered in a situation, it's not just that situation, it's all the remembered. And when I say remembered, I'm talking about, like it doesn't necessarily have to be conscious remembering. It can be conditioning that actually inflames you and your system, where you can really have a hijacking, because it's not really about just that present thing. So I think what we're really defining here in a way is how trauma, stored experience, can inflame you in those core affects where where the information gets lost in the inflammation. It's not about the present time.
I remember one time when I was a kid, my teacher in junior high school insulted me for something. I don't remember why. She insulted me for something. And I told my mother about it when I got home. I said, I'm really angry at her. And my mother said, you shouldn't be angry at an adult. She's your teacher. You shouldn't be angry at her. So now that's a very mild trauma. But here is a normal. I mean, she could have said, I can appreciate why you're angry. Just don't tell her that. Don't hit her or something. That would be a different way of dealing. But to what am I supposed to do if I feel angry, but I'm not supposed to feel angry? That creates a problem. So
20 years later, you're in therapy with all sorts of difficulties listening to the information of the rage system.
So if your social environment,
appropriate stands.
Right. If your social environment affirms the validity of your feeling at the time, you say, yeah, well, that's a natural reaction, but just don't express it. That would be a way of dealing with it. But if you say, that's the wrong sensation, that's the wrong feeling, you shouldn't be angry, that screws you up. So that's the idea of congruency and anyway.
You're both gonna like fragment your mind in terms of like you're gonna lose the information, but also like you'll get into these reactive, like generalized inflammatory loops of like you'll be angry that you're angry because like you shouldn't be angry.
That's right. You shouldn't.
And then like, but then when
you get angry because you're angry.
You'll get angrier. But like, and you'll probably actually get also inflammation in like the body itself.
Yeah,
so it's like
it's
system is inflamed.
That's what I mean by the incongruence. If you can just express it and acknowledge it and recognize it for what it is, that resolves it. That's it.
I trust what you're saying. I will try to practice that.
So will I. Easier said than done.
God.
Where are we? Oh, it's more than four. It's more than.
Okay, so I guess. Yeah, well, we will. I guess.
Okay.
So I guess we could like. Okay, so.
11:55.
Let's just like say something to like sign off the recording and let Nan get to her meeting, and then like I guess I'll send it around, and we'll like identify clips that we particularly like, and I think the whole conversation would be good for that to be online, because I mean I really liked it, and I think people could benefit from it, and so in terms of for the conference, like a curated section, and I think maybe the whole thing for YouTube.
Sure.
Okay.
Great dialogue. I'd like to say in closing that we need to pay attention to our bodies, remember that we have them, and we need to focus on each other rather than our devices for these emotional systems to work properly.
And I would say that we should appreciate our bodies, appreciate what our bodies are, our bodily reactions to situations. Our body is trying to help us. Our body is doing. We've evolved to be healthy and to live. So and our bodily systems are organized to enable us to do that. So the best thing is for us to be aware of what our body is telling us, and try as much as possible to respond accordingly. And that will be physical and mental health.
Well said, Barry. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing the whole symposium.
Thank you.
And that's my dog, Jilly, hearing something that she perceives as her job to go bark at. So I'll sign off, guys.
Okay.
Take good care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye, Nan. Bye, Adam.
Bye.
I'll send you the recording.
Please do. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.